Thank you.
All right. I think everything is now functioning. People in Zoom land here.
Just on the table. When you have your microphone on, it sounds pretty good.
I would just want to let you know that I received a message saying that the host had lost connection, and I sat there for about 5 or 6 minutes and finally bailed out. So there may be other people waiting to get in that are still waiting for the host to get a connection.
Yep, the host is connected. We're good to go.
Okay.
All right. Let's see. Turn on that. So just a reminder for planning board members, I'm practically shouting, but you won't be, so make sure you turn on your mic and put it right in your face. And we're good to go.
Okay, welcome everyone. Let's start with the agenda review. And are there any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Jody, if I could, I just want to clarify something. The last item on the agenda, 36 Valley View Road, is not really an agenda item. The board gave final approval to that application, but we were waiting on a plat to sign. So I have the plats for the chair to sign tonight. There isn't any further work needed by the board other than Jody signing those, but I wanted to make sure that we didn't forget it.
Okay. Anything else? All right, great. The next thing is privilege of the floor. Remember, a reminder that you have 3 minutes. If you want it recorded, you should wait until the public hearing. So does anyone have anything that they would like to bring up? I can't see up there to see if anyone's got a hand up. Somebody's green. Who is that?
That's us.
Oh, that's
I
us.
don't see any
Oh,
hands.
there's
Oh,
Chad.
Ed, go ahead.
All right, Chad.
Just a quick question. There will be a public hearing opportunity for comment on the Beardsley Lane later.
That's correct. The public comment was not closed at the last meeting and will continue today.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So if there isn't anything else for privilege of the floor, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from January 2023. And if everyone's had a chance to read them and is okay with them, I'd like a motion. Thank you. Can we have a second? Thank you. Cindy, can we have roll call?
Bergman,
Yes.
Cowan,
Yes.
Maher,
Yes.
Benucci, Scriber,
Yes.
and Colbert.
Yes.
Okay. Minutes are approved. The next thing is the town board liaison report, and Leslie isn't here. Is she on? Okay. Thank you, Leslie.
I had trouble connecting for the first time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Short and sweet. The town board has started meeting with some potential IT providers, gathering information and cost estimates. We have a lot of information to weed through. We've gotten a lot of good advice. And hopefully we can decide in the next couple of months on a system and service that works for everyone and is affordable. Other towns are dealing with the same issue, getting security for data as well as user-friendly systems. So we'll be having fun with that. The town board passed a law allowing partial property tax exemption for volunteer firefighters in Danby. So hopefully that is a very small recognition of the services they provide for residents. And I don't know if Dave's going to talk about it later, but short-term rental issue has been on the table for a while, and I assume that we'll be starting to consider gathering information, surveys or meetings to find out what residents are interested in as far as short-term rental is concerned. That's it.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions about that? Okay, so the first development review that we need to look at is East Miller Road. The applicant is Jeremy, I don't know how you say the right name, Canute. We need to schedule the public hearing. And do the seeker, review the sketch plan and provide feedback to the applicant.
So I'll note, this is the first you've seen the application, so it's just kind of a sketch. This currently does not comply with zoning, so the applicant is headed to the BZA. The planning board can't take any action until that is complete, because it's basically an incomplete package, but it is a chance to review it. And, you know, if you have any comments, suggestions about the proposal, you could provide them at this time.
Okay, would you like to talk to us about it?
Sure.
Come on up and use the mic.
So the Zoom land can hear you.
My name's Jeremy Canute. This is Sanford Miller. His property is currently 82 acres between Hornbrook Road and East Miller Road. We would like to subdivide it. He'd like to keep 3.5 acres roughly with the house, the yard, the pond, and the outbuildings. His daughter Beth would get 11.5 acres kind of directly behind the house. And then I would get 67 acres, I guess it would be east of that property. Yep. The yellow area would be the 3.5 acres with the house and the pond. The pink area would be Beth Miller. The blue would be myself.
So my understanding from talking about the main issue is that the smaller piece doesn't meet our current zoning.
That's right. So the proposed 3-ish acre lot is smaller than the 10 acres required in this zone. What I've just put on screen is a resource map, which is kind of the start of the standard subdivision process. Because this is a 3-lot subdivision, it triggers that review process to make sure that we're preserving the most important natural features and environments, which I think the way he's proposing breaking it down, you know, it makes a lot of sense along those lines. You know, doesn't take a genius to see where the important areas on this site are. There's steep slopes, streams.
The majority of that wooded area is ravine, gullies, nature area pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's 80+ acre lot, under the zoning, it is entitled to a total or maximum of 8 lots, which he's not requesting all of those. So it is a little complicated think about how future lots could come after the 3, if someone ever wanted to do that. There is frontage in multiple locations. But as you saw on the resource map, some of that is a little difficult to access, steep slopes and wetlands. I did think briefly, like, this kind of seems like a cluster implementation of cluster subdivision, which would allow the smaller lot size without a variance. That then kicks in that buffer distance for all new buildings, which I was concerned would be an issue with the pink lot. And the fact that we're putting an existing house in, and we ran into that issue before with being close to existing houses, with the way the buffer requirement is, would probably, if we tried to avoid a variance, I think we'd end up needing a variance for that. It just seemed like it made more sense to go for a lot size variance for the one small lot. And I would expect that the planning board would probably put a condition in the subdivision that the number of future subdivisions allowed, that you lose a lot allowed for the 3-acre lot from what's remaining. And the 10-acre lot, obviously you've lost one. Are there any comments or other concerns that you'd want me to do more research on before this comes back to the board? Assuming it receives favorable variance treatment.
Or anything else you need from us?
And what's left is like 60.
67.
I'm assuming you're keeping, if you did go on 60 acres, your driveway would be closer to the house at 16 versus your road frontage and neighbors.
Correct. There's no way to get from,
Right, so
From
the
there.
one suggestion would be the big,
yes.
cost.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't foresee ever building anything there, but would like the option to, certainly, if decided to in the future, but
We could put on a proposal like no more than 6, like of the 67 acres, no more than 6 lots could be divided up. Well, not sure how you would do that, but
Yeah.
put that on.
Section.
Right, because kind of the 50 acres that in question would be
It could.
different.
Yeah.
Which would be the recommended.
Yeah.
Because your intent is to keep the natural stuff natural. That's
Absolutely,
what I'm thinking now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions? So what we do is just say, you need to. Good luck. You have to go for the variance, yeah. Good luck with the variance.
so that's next week.
Next
correct?
week.
Okay,
Then you'll see these folks again
We'll come
next
back
month,
again.
assuming if they wrap up next week,
okay,
then you'll see them next month, and if not, month after.
okay.
Why that but.
That's your access.
No, not the one with the road back.
At the
Yeah.
bottom,
Back to the.
there's a nice area down by the creek. Yeah.
Okay,
Anything else for me?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck. What?
We can put it on.
Oh. Good night.
Thank you.
Okay.
One of them will be.
One is just me signing. Okay. So moving on, the next one is the Beardsley Lane, which the public meeting is still open, right? We left it open.
Yes, the public hearing is still open, so if you want to recognize anyone who has something else to say.
I guess my question would be, has anything been turned in? Because people had an opportunity to send letters or other stuff over this past month as well. Have we received anything?
One letter was received this morning and emailed to everyone. I'd be happy to read some of it if people, because obviously it's hard to read something today if you haven't looked at it yet. It is substantial. Let me see here.
There was one from the neighbors. Two seconds.
There's Andy.
There's a short one. Could be.
Oh, do you mean the one from Virginia, Kathy, about the
No,
PCA?
no, maybe whatever.
Yes.
It's a long one.
All right. Shall I put that up on the screen? A minute. All right. So I'm going to run through this. I'll read it in case anyone didn't have time. To the Town of Danby Planning Board regarding the application by Jeremy Thompson for property at 105 Beardsley Lane to be approved as a tourist house. If this application is granted, we would like to request that the following requirements and conditions be included in the approval document. 1, 805 general considerations, paragraph 6, protection of adjacent property and the general public against noise, glare, unsightliness, and noxious odors, air, water, and soil or other objectionable features. In accordance with this clause, we request that the existing fence be extended to be in line with the front of 105 Beardsley Lane. The South Point regulations do not allow fences beyond the front of the house or more than 6 feet high. We note that regulations in Tompkins County require fences to be built along the finish side to the neighboring property, structural elements facing into the property building the fence. A row of evergreen trees be planted beyond the fence and to the easement line at Beardsley Lane. This row of trees would be planted on the west side of the driveway at a location where existing site conditions permit. We ask that the following restrictions be written into the approval document. It's unclear to us as to what that document may look like, but because the application for a tourist home clearly changes activity and or use, this is subject to the general provisions and special permit clauses of the zoning regulations. We believe these clauses give the planning board the authority to write restrictions into the approved document and for the planning officer to enforce it. General provisions 900.5. Limiting the listing of rental section of the building to 180 days. This is already the intent as stated in Mr. Thompson's 12/7/22 letter. Clarification is needed as to which 180 days. Rent only to a single family at a time, single family defined by Danby zoning laws in the definition section. Also the intent per Mr. Thompson's letter. Dwelling is owner occupied in Mr. Thompson's letter and required by Danby zoning law by definition of tourist home as opposed to boarding house or hotel. Overnight accommodations can only take place in the secondary part of the house. Secondary versus primary is not defined in the Danby code, but reasonable requirements might be by square footage or number of bedrooms. This dwelling has a basement which can be entered separately and closed off from the rest of the house. We would argue that this is the secondary part of the house and therefore overnight accommodations should be limited to this part of the house, with the primary part being used by Mr. Thompson and his family as the owner of the property. Enforcement. We all agree that some of these requirements may be difficult to enforce, but that should not stop them from being written into the approval. The point of having restrictions, rules, and regulations is to deter people from not complying with these restrictions, rules, and regulations, and to provide a legal framework should they not be complied with. We believe that the town of Danby has the right and/or obligation to write these intentions and requests into their approval document. We thank you for your consideration of this issue. Deborah Montgomery and Andrew Coe, 111 Beardsley Lane. Monica and John Vackener, 114 Beardsley Lane.
Great.
Do we have anyone else that wanted to speak during the public hearing?
Someone in the back. Oh.
Can you tell that about myself? That's not gonna work. Okay. Sorry. Hi, everybody. I was on Zoom last month, but I'm Virginia Tessie. You got my letter. I live at 151 Beardsley Lane. I'm also an attorney at Bouskey Holstein downtown. I've been doing real estate for about 20 years. And I was the one, again, that asked the BZA to take a look at David's determination that Jeremy's proposed use actually fits what the intended use of this kind of tourist home designation was, which he loves, by the way. He says that to me all the time. Anyway, knowing that you were going to probably try and close the public hearing portion today, I'm kind of doing this a little bit backwards, but I wanted to try to, again, hopefully we'll wait until we have a BZA determination. But if BZA determines that David is every bit the smart guy that he is, and they agree with him over me, and we're back here talking about conditions for the site plan approval or the site plan review, then I wanted to address a couple of those points here. So let me just, sorry, I made these notes realizing this afternoon that that would be something that we should probably talk about today instead of next month. So I should also mention that many of my neighbors asked me to speak for them, and they were either Zooming in or unable to attend, but I know attendance was a little overwhelming last month. So I'm jumping in here for that. What I wanted to say is I do think that the idea of adding these conditions is important. Most notably, and I think David mentioned a couple times in meetings and most recently on your staff memo, David, the idea of kind of going along with what the loud neighbors say as being arbitrary and capricious and getting yourselves into trouble for that. He's 100% right on that. No, I won't actually argue with that point. But what I want to point out is this is so quirky because I would go the opposite argument on that. I think it is arbitrary and capricious not to really look at these conditions closely when we don't have a working knowledge of what a lodging home is. A lot of the examples that David put together in the staff memo for what the town has done were bed and breakfast. Everyone kind of has an idea of what a bed and breakfast is. There are state regulations on bed and breakfast. There's Department of Health regulations on bed and breakfast, keeping inspections going. We don't have that on what is being proposed here, a lodging house. We have building codes, and certainly that's something I think we can all agree with, but we don't have the other stuff. So I think it would be arbitrary and capricious not to look at very specific conditions here of what we are actually trying to, or what the board, the town, is trying to approve when they approve a site plan approval for a tourist home lodging house, as opposed to a tourist home bed and breakfast. And actually, my other point here was that I think the goal is to distinguish this tourist home from a commercial motel, a commercial hotel. I think everyone understands that's not what it is. So let's put in some conditions that just make sure that we're in line with what the idea here. And actually, Chuck, Jeremy's attorney, put together a letter to you guys, I think, last week that started that process, that started some of the conditions. Homeowner is going to change the occupancy to a lodging house under building code. That makes sense to me. Property is surely owner occupied. The rental area is the top 2 floors, the 5 bedrooms and the common areas. And the rental area, I phrase it a little differently, Chuck, is that it should be available as one cohesive unit as opposed to renting to a family. I think it's problematic for the planning board to try and say family. So I think as much as I would love that as a neighbor, I think it's a problem for you guys. So I would phrase that more as rental as a cohesive unit as opposed to kind of individual bedrooms. You know, but the other ones that I put together, and I'm sorry, I typed this up real quick before, just before coming, so you had something to look at, and I wasn't just word vomiting at you. But my thought is the idea of, instead of, you know, capping this 180 days of rentable nights or rented nights, how about rentable nights? How about 180 advertised nights? It's a lot easier to look at what's advertised as opposed to what's actually rented and try to keep track of that. You know, as my neighbor's letter put together, you know, and put forth, we're concerned about enforcement of these. We have a neighbor, you know, the homeowner here has a history of ignoring other conditions in the planning board and the code enforcement office. And we want to know that whatever conditions are put here, you know, are going to be enforced somehow. So my suggestion, to kind of add on to this, is one, let's talk about the number of days that it's being advertised as opposed to being rented. Let's the off-street parking requirements I was a little unsure of, but I would defer to David on that for later. And the other was an enforcement provision. How about on the first violation, there's a fine that, you know, that's set right here in the conditions. On the second violation, it's triple that fine, and on the third, you'll lose your approval. You know, and there's a stay for 5 years. You know, something that actually has teeth in it. It's a proposal. It's, you know, it's, we could talk about other options, certainly, or you guys can talk about other options. But that was, you know, that was my idea for something that actually has teeth in it. So that's what I got. I think that's what I put together. Everyone had that? Or I have a couple more? Oh. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, thank you. That's what I have. Yeah.
All right, Ted?
Yes, hi, thank you. I read through the material that was available on the web, admittedly a little bit in a hurry and at the last moment, but there were a couple of things I picked up. And interestingly, some of them were already covered by the letter from, I think, Andy Cove and what Virginia just said. But I'll start off with something similar, simple. We are talking about 180 days maximum rental, but there is no limit on the minimum rental. And I'm just going to look at this from the point of view, this may not be practical, but of what could go wrong. What could go wrong is that for 6 months of the year, you have families going in and out every day. So I propose that there should be a requirement on a minimum rental stay. To me, 2 or 3 days, at least would make sense. That would mean every weekend. 3 days would give you about every weekend and still not exceed 180 days. So that's some consideration. I notice, I mean, I'm kind of assuming from the appearance of the house that it has already received a certificate of occupancy, yet the address of the owner or agent on the application is not there. In fact, the address of the owner or agent is incomplete on the application. It's it looks to appear to be some trailer somewhere. The city and state are not given, and I find that kind of odd. There was a PowerPoint in the material, and I didn't notice who prepared it. It really doesn't matter that much. But the point, it tried to make the point that this is an ideal place for a tourist home or a motel, whatever you want to call it, because it's closest to the road. Well, do remember the history here. This lot was supposed to be set aside for agricultural purposes. And when the decision was made to allow a home to be built on it, it was with the promise that this was, yeah, I've got a really large family and they're going to live with me. So that point in the PowerPoint presentation is, it's a red herring. It's really not right. I also picked up on the word family in the letter that was read. I think a definition of family or another phrase, which implies what we would think of, sorry, I won't say we, what might be the commonly accepted definition, which is people related by blood and or marriage or whatever we call it these days, that it really, really is a family. I also pick up on the point of enforcement. If you don't write in the possibility of enforcement, it won't happen. It's already been stated, enforcement won't be easy. I think you should put in conditions on exactly how it can be enforced, and getting a report after the fact is not good enough. There should be a right of inspection, et cetera. Now, the staff memo, very interesting. And the staff memo tries to make a case that there have been lots of other bed and breakfasts in Danby. I'm not familiar with all of them. I can name two that I can think of. There's one on Comfort Road, a little bit south of where I live. And my memory of it was, it may have been a bed and breakfast, but it required a special permit to do it.
It's 3 minutes.
I believe the previous speakers had more than 3 minutes, so please bear with me. I'm not too far from the end. So that one is not a really good comparison. Then there is a statement that a recommendation of a tourist home was proposed for Gunderman Road for the old Angel Heart factory. I don't actually remember the facts, but I don't think that was approved. It was recommended, but if it was not approved, it was because the town board felt that that was not an appropriate use. So again, red herrings. I'm just surprised over time. I'm not a neighbor exactly. I drive by it more than I'd like, but I'm not a neighbor. And so really I have not much, I think the phrase is skin in the game. This isn't going to bother me. But I do look on this from the point of view of what would happen if it were next to me. And I really wouldn't appreciate what's happening under the circumstances. And I don't think this is, as was mentioned, over time, promises have been made and broken. I think you should be very careful and don't be.
Okay. Okay, do we have anyone else? Robert.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
I just would like to seek clarification on the process here, because my understanding is that there has been a request for a assessment by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and it would seem to me more appropriate that these discussions happen after that meeting, which I believe is next week, and that appeal is evaluated before we try and close a public hearing on something that is subject to appeal. So if you could clarify for me what the process is, please.
Hi, Robert. I'd be happy to clarify that. So you are correct. An appeal of the determination that this proposed use is a tourist home has been filed and will be before the BZA next Tuesday, a week from today. That process does create a delay in any granting of permits that are administrative, meaning from myself or from the code officer. It does not have any impact on deliberations by the planning board. And that is not only a feature of what the planning board is allowed to do, but it also doesn't create a requirement that impacts the landowner's property rights. They have a right to review under the standard process for site plan review. So that's the other important consideration there. Now, if the BZA did find against the use determination, then the use would not be allowed. If they found it was a different use that was not allowed, it wouldn't matter if site plan review had been granted or not, because it would be a not allowed use. So those two processes are separate and are kind of continuing.
Okay. I was just say thank you for the clarification. It seems to me unnecessary for us to have extended discussions about something that may ultimately be declined as a non-allowable use. And it would seem.
I don't know. Robert, you appear to have frozen. We are not frozen. Scott's not frozen, so it's not on our end.
I don't know if he's coming back on. or-
Yeah. You can unmute if you want to try again. There you go. We see you now.
What did you hear of my last comments?
I don't
That,
know.
that you thought it was odd for us to talk about something that could be overturned.
Yeah, it seems to me like a waste of time to have extended discussions about conditions for something that may be overturned as a non-allowable use in a week's time. It would seem to me more sensible to wait and have this meeting a month from now, once we have clear indication from the Board of Zoning Appeals whether this is going to be overturned or not, and then discuss conditions if the board finds that David has made a decision correctly.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No, okay. You want to close the public
Yeah, we
hearing?
can close the public hearing. And then we should talk about that.
So we have a few additions from last time by the applicant. The applicant has a presentation they have offered to give that will walk you through those, and those that I can put on the screen. And also, since last time, is the planting plan, which you all have in front of you, that includes some additional plantings in response to the planning board's request for additional buffer between the subject property and the neighbor to the west. As well as the change, I think, in response to Jamie's comment about lavender. Lavender is no longer on the berm. They proposed a different plan. So do you want them to walk us through it? Yeah. We could do the Reader's Digest version.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Ah.
Let's see.
And I would say for the record, I do know Virginia Tessy. I'm surprised it's only been 20 years she's been practicing. I thought it was longer. And the intent of this, is to give the board as much information about what's going on, so you're not acting in the dark. The intent is to explain to you why we think this is a tourist home and why it's reasonable to grant site plan approval. We listened, I think, carefully last time to the comments that the public made and members of the board made, and have tried to include those in what we're proposing, and as well as the comments made tonight. And one of the consistent themes I've heard is that whoever sent the letter, and Virginia both said there should be conditions. That has been Jeremy's position from the beginning. And back in December, he sent a letter to the neighbors in which he included some specific proposed conditions, like the 180 days, like the one family. We've always taken the position that there should be reasonable conditions on this. And from our point of view, there are various issues which affect how this potentially negative impacts on neighboring properties. And I think we've addressed all of them, at least we've attempted to address all of them. There are drainage issues. From my point of view, I'm not sure why the drainage issues are relevant here, because what we've got is a structure which was approved as a site plan approval, and how it's used doesn't affect the drainage and the stormwater issues. But since people have raised that, we're going to address those issues. The second issue is vegetative screening, and the landscaper who designed the landscape plan is present on Zoom, and she will talk more about that. And then I'll address some of the additional concerns which I think basically focus on how this property does or does not impact the rest of the neighborhood. With regard to drainage, you've got Route 96 to 96B to the east of the property. There is a long berm parallel with 96B, so that probably the major runoff of water will be off the highway, and this berm will direct that water towards Beardsley Lane as opposed to flowing down the hill. There was discussion at one point, or a plan at one point, to put lavender on top of that berm. It's now going to be elderberry. I think it just works better, but that, from the landscape point of view, that berm directs the water away from down the hill and into the ditch along Beardsley Lane.
Lots of animated arrows. There we go. On several places, he has what French are called French drains, which basically you dig a little trench, you put a piece of plastic piping in there, and it's perforated so the water can go into that and flow where you want it to go. And we've got moving arrows again, show that the water that would come down into the yard on the east side of the house will be directed again towards Beardsley Lane as opposed to flowing down the hill where it could impact other neighbors. Next one. Again, connected with any kind of stormwater management, you've got additional berms, and as we'll discuss in more detail later, there's plantings also, and plantings are important because obviously they absorb water. But the intent also, this is on the west side, to get the water not going down the hill, but towards Beardsley Lane. Those two yellow spots are going to be forsythia, which has several different purposes, at least two different purposes. One is during the summer when it's blooming, it provides vegetative screening, and also it will absorb water. And that's going to be on those berms to the west side of the house. This is the berm along parallel with Route 96B, and we're going to have elderberry there. Again, the elderberry will provide visual screening from Route 96B, and also will absorb some water to the extent it's necessary. This is the northeast corner of the property. The water will be running potentially there. I think most of it's going to be diverted by the berm, but to the extent it isn't, there's already viburnum and spirea, which have already been planted. So they have, again, that double purpose of absorbing water and providing vegetative screening. To the south of the property, there's going to be an orchard that has not been planted. There's going to have to be a fence around it for a couple of reasons. One, you have to, and also otherwise the deer will eat all the trees. But that also will absorb a lot of water and also will provide vegetative screening. We're now into this part of the vegetative screening, and with the board's permission, Monica, I don't remember the last name, who is the landscape, I think is present on Zoom. Can we simultaneously have her be able to talk? Yeah, she can talk now.
Not a miracle.
Hi, I'm Margot Chutin with Chutin Trowbridge Landscape Architects. I guess maybe we should just go back one slide. I mean, I think, you know, so along the roadway, you know, we switched the plantings from lavender, which probably would not do well in the condition alongside the highway, and switched it to sambucus, elderberry, which should, you know, grow quickly and form a thicket. And then, you know, as mentioned before, along the berms adjacent to the neighbor and the fence, Jeremy will be planting some forsythia. In addition, you know, we'll just add to the evergreens that are already out there with some Serbian spruce. And I think that's it. yeah, the orchard, as described, sounds like it's forthcoming.
And I believe you all have the landscape plan. Obviously, if you have questions regarding any of the landscape plan, we're happy to address those. A few other points I would make just about the landscape plan in general. The elderberry will be on top of the berm. There's the viburnum and spirea in the northeast corner. In the northwest corner, there is, I think there already are some rose bushes and there is some forsythia. Obviously, as time goes by, those grow bigger and more plentiful. Along the west side of the property, which in many ways, in terms of vegetative screening, may be the most important one for screening purposes. And we've got some photographs that are, I think will show this, what's going on. There is a fence already there, a wooden fence. It's 6 feet high. I believe it's 32 feet long. What that does in terms of screening is the driveway comes into what I call a hammerhead, and the fence is on the west side of that. So if people are moving cars there, the fence will block any headlights, which may be, from a practical point of view, the most offensive visual effects. So the fence is there and also affects the view of the house itself by being there. Along the west side, there's also going to be, I think we showed it in one of the slides before, I think about 10 different forsythia plants on top of 2 berms. That'll also provide vegetative screening. There are already 3 Norwegian fir trees. And again, as with trees, they will get bigger over time. There's also going to be, I think it's 4 Siberian spruce trees. So there's going to be 7 evergreen trees on the west side of the house, which will provide visual screening. And I'll submit it also provides some screening from noise. You've got the fence screens from noise and the trees screened from noise. It's also interesting to keep, or I guess it's important to keep track of the slope of the land there. The land slopes fairly steeply downhill to the west. So, matter of fact, there's a picture, I think one of the pictures that you have shows that if you're standing on the west side of the house, looking over the fence, all you can see is the second story of the house to the west. So the fact that if sound goes out and the houses to the west are lower down altitudinally, that the sound will go over them rather than affect them. So the combination of the land sloping, a 32-foot, 6-high fence, 7 evergreen trees, forsythia bushes, etc. And I think about 180 feet from this house to the next house to the west, which is the closest house, that the combination of visual screening and noise screening is very much in place with the plan that we're developing. Jeremy has, if you want, he can go into a lot more detail. I think it's mostly on the northwest corner. There's also some other berms. And part of that is that that's where the septic field is. So it's to make it more attractive in some ways and also help with the flow of water. I think we have, I don't know, did we go through the whole slide?
So you went through most of the slides. I'm realizing that what I had was a previous version and Jeremy sent a new link, I think today. So what people have here is slightly different. There were less photos. There's really only photos. I think it might make sense since the board's had time to look at this, maybe see if you have questions, other things.
There were a few other points, if I can make them, and then happy to answer any questions, at least going to try to answer questions. In terms of other issues, there has been, I think I've tried to address the issue of view and noise. With regard to noise, one of the conditions which we are proposing is that while it is being rented, Jeremy will be there. And the owner occupied part of a tourist home is going to do something, I think, to discourage noise. As compared to someone being 180 feet away, he's going to be, I think he described as 1 wall away. So if people get really noisy, he'll probably knock on the door and say, be quiet. So I think noise, the fact that he's there, becomes an important component of mitigating any noise problems. And there was talk last meeting about traffic. This is the property, the easternmost property on Beardsley Lane. So if cars are coming to the bed and breakfast, they're not going by any other houses on Beardsley Lane. They'll go down Beardsley Lane, I think it's about 180 feet or something, and make a left turn into the driveway. They're not going to continue down. The other thing I would say in traffic is the intent is, not the intent, the condition that we're proposing is that it be rented to a family. And I'll get to how these are going to be enforced, and we're going to guarantee it happens. But if you have a family there, I'm going to submit that the amount of traffic from a family staying at a tourist home compared to a family farther down Beardsley Lane, which has parties, gatherings, etc., it's really not much different traffic than you have from a normal single occupied house. So I think the traffic issue may be a misnomer. I know David's made a determination about, is this a tourist home? And I guess you have to at least be comfortable that it is if you're going to approve it. There's the ground floor. Well, at least you should know about the issue, I think. There's the ground floor, and the ground floor's got 2 bedrooms. It's got a living room, dining room area, a kitchen, and a bath. That is the area where, actually, someone said, is Jeremy living there? Yes, he is. And that is where his primary residence is. The second floor, right above that, is exactly the same as the first floor in terms of floor layout. It's got 2 bedrooms, living room, dining room area, kitchen and bath. Above that, the next floor up there is an area which is smaller in footprint because on the second floor, there's a vaulted ceiling in the living room, so it's smaller because of that vaulted ceiling. It's got 3 bedrooms and a bath. And then there's the attic, which is much smaller square footage and no bedrooms there. It's, I guess, people who rent it could use it, but we got a limit of 180 days. When it is not being rented, it's not that the upper floors are going to be empty. Jeremy's intention is to use that attic area for himself. As a matter of fact, his actual intention, he told me, was to put some kind of a console so he can do video games and things like that when it's not being rented, which is more than half the year. With regards to the living room, dining room area on the second floor above the ground floor, when it's being rented, the renters will use that. When it's not being rented, Jeremy will be using that for a couple reasons. One, it's a more luxurious living room area. It's going to have the much bigger TV. It's going to have a nicer couch. It's going to have the vaulted ceiling, and the views outside are significantly better from that floor than they are from what in the basement area. So for entire year, the ground floor, basement, whatever we want to call it, is going to be occupied by him. For the next floor up, half the time it's going to be rented at most, and half the time it's going to be used by Jeremy. With regard to the next floor, when it's rented, it may be used. When it's not rented, it'll be 3 bedrooms, which he will have available for friends and family who are visiting, for guest rooms. And the attic is probably going to be used more by him than anyone else. So the vast majority of the house is going to be him. The other thing that ties in with this is this concept of it's a maximum of 180 days. I don't know much about the tourist home business, but if you have a maximum of 180 days, in practice, you're going to have less. And he may only rent it, if he rents it, 2 days every week, rents it on weekends, and he does it 50 weeks a year, which is not going to happen because I don't think anyone comes in February. That would be a maximum of 100 days. We have a cap of 180. I think in practice, it's obviously going to be less, just the economics of it. I know someone, I don't remember who, today said minimal rentals. From a practical point of view and from a commercial point of view, I don't think it's really feasible. And it's also, someone was saying, they only can advertise for 180 days. But I've got a law practice. I have people call up and say, we'd like to come in. I don't say, I'm available for appointments on Tuesday afternoons and Wednesday mornings. The same here is you advertise and you see when people want to come. And then hopefully they come. And hopefully when they want to come, those days are available. If he gets to 180 days during the year, by your regulations, the condition he's agreeing to, he's cut off. So if he can only advertise for 180 days, I think from a practical point of view, it's just not going to economically make any sense. And similarly, to say that everyone has to stay for 2, 3, 4 days or a week, we can't control what the people who want to stay there are going to stay. But the change, I guess the concern was people move out, people move in. There's this big disruption to the neighborhood. Someone moves out of a bed and breakfast, they pick up their suitcase, they walk to the car, they put the suitcase in, they drive away. You have one car trip. When people come, they park their car, pick the suitcase up, they walk inside, there's one car trip. It's not like we're having moving vans. So the people moving in and moving out doesn't cause any more disruption to the neighborhood. I would also add one other point about this. Yeah, I'll make this the last one.
Because we've heard a lot of this before.
Okay.
So,
I think this is new.
okay.
The question also is, how do the people, the renters, affect the neighborhood? And if they're in the house, they probably don't affect the neighborhood at all. So the question becomes, how do they affect the neighborhood if they're going outside? And from a practical point of view, that may be reasonable. They maybe come more in the summer and they go outside. The lawns of the property, there's 4 sides of the property. On the north side, there is gardens, there's a fountain. There's not really any area for people to stand around and hang out. On the west side, we've got this wooden fence, we've got the driveway, we've got the fir trees. There's not a place for people to stay there. The lawn where people would walk and maybe talk is to the south. And basically there's not a single neighbor within the development to the south and to the east. And the only things you're going to see to the east is Route 96B. So the outside will also be less impactful to the neighbors. That's it.
Thank you. All right.
Excuse me, may I make a 1 or 2 sentence comment on something that was just said?
Up to you.
No. We need time to discuss it.
Very brief.
All right. So, thoughts? I mean, David, I did poll what you had suggested.
I think a couple thoughts on that.
No, turn on your mic.
Oh, sure. One, and I appreciate the switch on the berm, but I'd worry that the elderberry are not drought tolerant enough to thrive on that berm and therefore not provide a very good screen. And also I'm wondering what happens further down to the south on the berm. There's no planting proposed there. So does that just become meadow or what happens there? And then I just had a thought about the Serbian spruces that are proposed. It seems like at least one of them is on the leach field and I'm just not sure that's a very good idea. So I'm wondering if there's space to pull it maybe a little bit toward the west. That's all I have in mind.
You want to respond to that?
I think you're asking for a response, right? You want a response?
Sure. I mean, it's yeah.
I
Someone would like to
let
respond?
Marga know that they can unmute if they're the appropriate person.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly look at the elderberry. I believe I did look at it for drought tolerance, but I'm happy to look at it again. And I believe to the south, there were other trees planted along the edge, south of the berm.
South is this way.
Yes, yeah, the larger circles there, I believe were already on the previous plan.
So Margot, what I'm referring to is south of where the elderberry are planted up on the berm. It doesn't look like there's anything proposed there. So I was just wondering.
Yeah, I think that was proposed as meadow. It was meadow planting, meadow seeding. Sorry, did you get that?
Yeah. Other thoughts? I was just looking at the planting. I mean, I think the roof is going to be what the roof is going to be, and there's very large window areas on this building that are going to be what they're going to be because they're 3 stories high, and at this point, there's nothing that's going to shield them. But I was wondering about the trees, the new trees proposed. I think the fencing that we added in the previous go around for the hammerhead is sufficient. Assuming most likely the owner is going to be parking in the back, since I think that's your entrance, right, is on the back side to the lower floor. And just thinking, I was thinking natural tendency of traffic flow of someone pulling into the driveway, especially if you're coming in as a rental, like you're probably going to pull in. You're going to think, oh, I'm going to pull around this circle because it's right at the front door. Your natural tendency is to turn to the passenger side is toward the building. So they're going to loop around that whole circle. So I was thinking that maybe those trees aren't far enough north to catch all the headlight traffic that's going to come off of people turning that loop and also turning into the front of the driveway toward that neighbor's house. So I appreciate the added trees. I'm just wondering if they're quite in the right location to hit the impact of that headlight traffic as compared to what the house is going to be, because the house is it's up high on the hill and it has high windows. I don't think the tall trees are really going to make much impact from the house lighting. And there were comments about the invasiveness of the forsythia, but that's not my world, so. You know?
I know last time we were talking about, like what parameters are we allowed to put on it and stuff, and if we've looked at it, if you can tell us like where you are with that. I know obviously lighting, dark sky and stuff, and I would definitely want that for sure. Especially with the kind of rooftop deck where people can hang out and not have bright lights shining right at the neighbor would be better too. But kind of what other things can we actually put on to kind of protect everybody, keep everybody happy?
So I think the two most important guidelines for site plan requirements is that any requirement that you impose is ancillary to the use. So it's a non-incredibly significant change to the site plan that doesn't change the use. It addresses a specific detriment that you recognize that could come from that use. So it has to be addressing something that you say this is a problem, like the headlights, I think was a perfect issue. There was a possibility of negative impacts from headlights turning into the hammerhead facing right at the neighboring house. You identified that as a finding, and then you made a requirement that they put a fence along that area, and that fence, you know, if that was challenged, if Jeremy came and Article 78 the town and said this is an arbitrary condition, you can say specifically this is what we said is a problem that we're addressing, and this is how that addresses it. So it's a strong enforceable condition.
So, David, you suggested to look at some specific pieces of the zoning law. And I actually printed them out.
That in my memo, the conditions, the general considerations.
So one of them talked about how you would, and I'm assuming you would have to tell people that were coming where and how they would go to where they would park their cars. So it was at least, I don't know. For the people, the rest of the people living in the area. The other thing that was in here that I don't think there's been any discussion of was just have to do with pedestrian and bike traffic and intersections. Obviously, we're not in a city, so most of that doesn't apply, but appropriate provisions for, this says handicapped persons, which is not the right term to begin with.
This is from 1991.
Persons with handicap would be much better. But at any rate, I didn't see anything about those kind of provisions. I don't know that they're required in our zoning, but it does.
Yeah, so
It was confusing to me.
right. So a lot of the general considerations for site plan review are related to the fact that generally site plan review is for commercial uses. So ADA actually doesn't apply to homes. The fair housing requirements are the accessibility standards for homes. So that general consideration, is really about circulation on site when you have, if you think about a strip mall, there's sidewalks with ramps and things
But
like
a
that.
tourist home would not have to make accommodations for that.
I guess I'm not sure if they would, what requirement they would fall under, because they are an R3 occupancy.
Residential code, right?
Yeah, they're under
Yeah, I
residential
don't know
code.
residential code as well. I know like hotel, there's a minimum requirement, but that's under hotel.
Well, and in
So,
general,
which
the
would
way that
then you do a type A or type B, but I don't know that regular residential code would send you there.
Yeah.
Jump in a second. Okay.
I'd like to know.
So for a lodging house, and the type of lodging house that we're talking, just not losing every time. There's an exemption out of the requirements. So it's normally required, but because it's 5 bedrooms or less, then there's an exemption.
Right.
Specific accessibility.
Okay.
Can I jump in? Just ask Janet, the main, second floor, the main floor is handicapped accessible.
Wonderful.
There's a ramp on the outside of the building?
I would like to do that.
I don't know if this is my turn to speak.
I think you can answer the question.
We bought 2 pallets of what the product is called creek steppers, but they're stone plantations from the creek side, and that will make nice landing step as it goes to the front entrance. So that seems like a gradual lander of stones, but if it's cold out and we're really short on labor, so we haven't put them in yet. I think we're all confused. Are you saying there will be a stone ramp, or are you saying there will be stone stairs? I don't understand the difference.
So it would accommodate a wheelchair, is what you're saying?
Oh, it would be trickier with a wheelchair. It would be like in steps. Yeah. It's steps.
Yeah.
So that is, but okay. All right. And I think the other thing that I don't know, this doesn't have as much about the property, but I saw in the stuff that you were saying, I still feel like I'm concerned about using the term family.
Yeah.
Because that implies a traditional family, and I think.
So our zoning does have a very broad definition of family that is inclusive of an individual. It's inclusive of people who are not related but live together and function like a family, like they share meals and bills. It's inclusive of people who basically all of the ways that you could live together and act generally like a family, whether that's an unmarried couple or, yeah. So our zoning definition of family is very broad. We did have discussions about getting rid of it entirely, and that is why we no longer have single family in our zoning. It's one dwelling unit. But we actually didn't remove it from the definitions, and it's in the definition of dwelling, so it's still in there, but it is very,
It's defined very broadly.
yeah.
Good, okay.
Then there's one comment on it, you cannot enforce completely that wherever comes there will be a hearing.
Right.
They can lie to that.
Right,
What we can do, and what Jeremy is proposing to do, is that in the advertising for this property, he's going to say, for a family. And we're proposing that we submit copies of that advertisement to the town, so you see that it's advertising for a family. People could pretend to be a family, and they could not be, we would never know.
okay.
So I guess my thought is, I think some of the conditions that are brought forth are more restrictive than we ought to be based on other applicants that have come before us, but this applicant came forth with these conditions, which would also keep the neighbors too. So, I mean, but I think the vegetation, the screening makes sense, the dark sky compliant. I think some of this was already in our, when we saw him last time. I know some of the vegetation changed, but will anything that came before for the applicant carry over or not necessarily?
So this will be a new site plan approval,
Okay.
because that is what we're approving as a site plan. I think this will be the applicant's fourth site plan, but it is new. So everything that you
Okay.
asked for in this is what he'll have to do, and the previous ones would
Okay.
no longer apply.
Okay. So there'll eventually be one that incorporates the new things we've talked about, drops out things that are not.
So this is what he's proposed. If you want changes, so we had some comments, and I don't think came to a consensus whether any of those comments rise to something that the whole board wants changed. But we can tell them to make changes and to come back, or you can approve contingent on those changes being submitted back to me. For example, if with the comment about the elderberry, you have options there. Usually in a site plan, we're not approving specific plants and the number and the exact location of them. So you could say, choose a more drought tolerant plant that's appropriate for a berm and leave it that open and give that to me, and I could confer with our one plant expert when that comes in, and make sure that that's something you're comfortable with. You could also decide you don't care. They can do whatever and make that change to the site plan, or you could agree today on, it has to be whatever it is. I do think at that point, if we have a suggestion and it works for everybody, that's great. We're kind of getting on the edge of how specific it's addressing a concern, but I do think if it is going to be planted and die, that's not very effective.
I was just thinking, like, if we're counting on something as a screen,
Mhm.
then to be effective as a screen, the plant should be thriving.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
but I don't know if it's necessary that there's a screen along the road anyway. I mean, I'm not sure why
Yeah.
it would have to be.
I feel like in previous conversations about the berm, it was more that it was important that there's some planting that holds it there instead of dirt. And that's how we got various proposals for what that would be. I'm not sure. This has been going on so long, I wasn't even the planner when it started. So, but my understanding is the first site plan was the planning board told the applicant to submit a site plan that with changes based on their conversation that was acceptable to the planner. That's not usually the way that we work. And because of that, we got a site plan that was very, very specific, and then we had to change it because they weren't doing exactly what was on it, even though. So that's why it's come back several times. I don't know. I mean, there is a lay of trees, so I don't know that. I mean, it's up to the board, of course, but I'm not sure that additional screening beyond a giant row of what are they, maples? But I would like it if the berm stayed there.
On the neighbor's side, I
Mhm.
mean,
Mhm.
probably quieter and nicer if you have blockage on 96 feet, but that's, yeah,
Mhm.
you know, that's not my concern. The neighbor that's right next to that.
Yeah, that's
Well,
more.
the
noise
stuff that's on
concern.
there shows up.
Mhm.
Please turn your mics on. It's difficult to hear you.
I was just saying that I don't, be honest, care as much about what they do on 96B, because that's not affecting neighbors. That's for their own screening, but that, what I want to make sure is the stuff that's being proposed and that will help block light and noise for the neighbor next to them, that is in place. And that we make sure that is, what they're proposing is done.
So maybe a general question from the board is this close enough that you're considering a conditional approval with some of the conditions we've discussed? There is, in front of you, there was a draft resolution created by the applicant. I went through it and made some edits that are my suggestions that you edit. A lot of them are actually around the floor numbers, because just to be totally clear, this isn't a 4-story building, it's a 3-story building with a basement that has building code implications. So I want to make sure that we're specific when we talk about that.
2.5, but not,
Yeah,
I thought it had to be considered 2.5, but not 3, because it was 3, it has to have an elevator, right? Or is that?
yeah. So yes, I think that's also a fair. So there's various building code issues that I don't want to confuse with some of the wording that was in by the applicant.
Yeah, I would definitely change it to 3-story also.
Yeah.
If not, then basically they need to put in an elevator. If
Yeah.
they're gonna claim it's a 3-story house.
Right. Again, that's a building code issue, so not a planning board issue. So that's something
Alright.
Steve enforces and went through with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
To that effect, if he already got a certificate of compliance. is
Uh,
that copy of that?
Do you have your, yeah, he has a CO. Yes, which is the same
But they don't
occupancy
have
cost and
another
same rules, the same building code rules.
Under the table. But Steve would have to come back and do it
He's taken over.
for a lodging house.
Yes. We discussed it.
Okay. So what are,
So we could look at this draft document. We could ask the applicant to make some changes and come back. Or we could start with drafting our own conditions if you don't want to start with that template. We have our standard approval document. If we were to use our standard approval document, in this case, I would suggest that the board consider adopting a set of findings, which could be adopting the 2 staff memos as findings, or you could list other findings. The applicant's findings, other than the floor situation, are, I thought, relatively reasonable. It's very dense and it's a lot of specificity that you don't really need. So I'm looking to the board for how you'd like to proceed.
I feel like all vegetation could be condensed unless we're asking for something specific, but I don't. feel like we get started with this plan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's probably how I'll go.
Maybe it makes sense to use our own instead.
We could do that.
And just pull points from this
Yeah.
as we see necessary.
Reference the site plan,
Yeah.
So the common house staff to make sure these are the plans that they can see that are.
yeah.
Get up our document. So just polling the board, you feel like you're ready to discuss making a decision tonight?
I think so.
Well, why don't we start with conditions, because I know you guys have conditions that you're thinking about.
And all lighting, dark side compliant.
Do you guys have your mics on? Some of the words are pretty muffled.
Yep, that is the perennial reminder, you have to eat your mic for it to pick you up.
Mumble. Sky, I just said all lighting should be dark sky compliant.
Too many keyboards in front of me.
So for the vegetation, we could say in addition to the site plan or changes to the site plan are.
Mhm.
And then. Just like G.
So I did put in a draft, dark sky suggestion here. I'll read it and you can see if it captures. All exterior lighting, including lighting on rooftop decks, will be dark sky compliant. Light sources will be completely shielded from view from the property line and beyond.
Yep, like that.
Do we need to acknowledge the stormwater for this use? I know why it was acknowledged before, but.
I think we previously found that they had addressed the stormwater concerns with the engineer. They've installed all of those things. Unless you see a change in stormwater from this use.
No.
Ooh. Okay.
Is there a way to, and I don't know if we can do this with how it's set up, but that if there's I don't know why there'd be more than 4 vehicles, but if there was parking for more than 4 vehicles, that they could be screened from the view of the neighboring properties? Is there space for that to happen there?
So they can't add more parking without coming back for site plan review.
He has so much parking. He has.
But I think
He
there
has the
are
whole thing, so
6 spaces plus the turnaround. If you wanted to consider if additional screening was needed for the turnaround, I mean, there's a lot of planting there. I think that was a question of if you thought that a fence was needed for that.
right, I knew the fence was there for the lights, but
There is a
it-
berm.
Is there an
in the
issue?
berm?
Sorry, Caleb. Is there an issue with how far forward the fence can go? I feel like that was-
Yes, they said their, again, not our problem, but their neighborhood agreement is that the fence can't go in front of the house. Like that would,
That would fix the problem for them.
well, the fence can't go in front of the house, so it can't go right by the circle.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
If they let it, so that's fine.
See, and I don't actually know whether if you got on the other side of that fence, it probably would screen where the parking is.
Yeah, there is a berm there and
Okay,
a lot of trees
okay.
proposed as well.
I
Do
don't
you want to look
know.
at the site plan again? No, it's just right here.
Could we-
Yeah. So that's this area though,
Right,
yeah.
So could we be one of the conditions that they will follow the site plan as presented and submitted?
Yeah.
yeah.
Unless we want any changes to it. Oh, I'm on the wrong keyboard again.
I mean, the only real stuff I heard was like talking about what they're planting, but again, I think that's a suggestion more than something that would be in this. our approval.
So I think if we want them to have flexibility to plant something other than what's specifically listed there, we should say that. Jamie, should we nix the elderberry was a comment? Do you want to suggest other things, have them come back, or tell them to bring us something?
I'm thinking, I mean, there are many options. I'm sure Margot is quite capable of coming up with something better than I can suggest, so.
Okay.
And I would also just mention that if we're counting on the Serbian spruce to provide a good screen, then the ones that are located on the leach fields are probably,
Yeah.
I would say I wouldn't want to plant trees on the leach field. So if they have to shift, then the screen, part of the screen goes away. So I don't know, that should be addressed somehow. I'm not
Yeah,
saying.
I can move those over.
Thank you.
I didn't hear what they said.
I can just move those over.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Anything else?
Do we want to put something about the, they've kind of put their own restrictions on. Do we want to say that they'll adhere to their own restrictions that they brought up? It's 180 days. I mean, you put some stuff in here. I mean, something that says that they will follow the rules that they set.
I don't think we, like, I personally would if he did bring it forward. It's because we wouldn't for anyone else. And if he wanted to just screw the idea of living there, we wouldn't be meeting, like, he could just do whatever. Just the way it is in our town right now, like the way, so, but he doesn't see no problem with it, if he does do it.
So you would be okay with us putting in your proposals into it as part of it, right? Following the proposals that you set? I think we do it.
Yes, we would not have proposed it. We did not.
It helps with the meeting.
David,
Go ahead, Scott.
isn't that beyond our purview? To codify the conditions of occupancy? Not to mention that it's totally unenforceable, it would appear. And also not to mention that, let's say the house gets sold in 2 or 3 years. There's no way the town, I don't think there's any way the town could come in and enforce any conditions that the applicant, suggested. These are what I thought the letter was very gracious and the intentions were well meant, but the applicant's own letter is a testament that conditions can change intentions. In other words, his original intentions were thrown out because of conditions in his life. Well, that can happen again. And I don't see any way to make that legally binding or codify it at all.
Is it possible to state that in such a way, stating that it's the current?
No, it runs with it.
It runs with the land. It can't be.
The land,
Yeah.
so that if we put it in there, then that's a forever thing.
Yes.
Give you a suggestion on what.
Would somebody be able to come back to us to request a change on that?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
So yes, a future owner who didn't want to comply with a requirement of a site plan could come and ask for a new site plan review process with different requirements. We've had that happen a couple times when conditions change in that way.
But the condition have to wait at least 7 years before that should be done, but terms will be up. Yeah, exactly. Our terms will be up by then.
Yeah, I am, just to be clear, dubious about, you know, a condition of site plan being, you know, fines or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
I don't see that in a site plan condition. It's not actually about the site plan, and that's one of the,
Right.
the things that's questionable here is that these are conditions about the site plan.
Right.
Where was that?
I mean,
I could cover the site.
So I did, as you all, I'm sure saw because you carefully read the staff memo, note that there were, in other approvals, the conditions that have been addressed mostly included a limitation on the size of the sign. It seems like a past planner really liked 10 square feet. There is already a similar limitation in the zoning.
Right.
And then also a requirement that all parking needs to be met on site. We haven't imposed a specific condition there. I think that the site plan layout, in my opinion, has plenty of parking space. I don't see an issue there, but I just wanted to make sure that we've all considered the various things that have been kind of the standard in the past for this. And we did see there was one instance where the occupancy was limited, and that was for one person who was renting. Her tourist house was 2 bedrooms, and she lived in one of them, and they had a max occupancy of 4 beyond her.
But that would fall under, like,
There's a max occupancy for the building, yeah. And they are, if we keep this condition in compliance with the requirements set in the application for occupancy class under the building code,
Yeah.
that's keeping it in the R3 occupancy class as a lodging house with owner occupancy, no more than 5 bedrooms and no more than 10 occupants.
I mean, I think there's plenty of driveway and I wouldn't want to park on the side of Pierce Williams application, but if we want to add that it has to be on site just as a safeguard, I think that would be reasonable because I don't think there's going to have an issue fitting the cars in
Yeah,
the driveway.
that could be, it could be a requirement that that's one of the house rules in any listing that renters park on the lot.
I mean, in terms of the signage, I feel like that's more of a B&B thing. I feel like most Airbnbs and VRBOs just have their normal house number.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't like them.
Yeah.
So I am hearing interest in considering approving with conditions site plan review. We've got those conditions.
You might want to get the year right.
No, that's good. And does someone want to move this?
I'll make the motion. Like, nobody wanted to jump in first. Yeah, I'll make the motion to approve this.
I'll second it.
Who was the second?
Colleen.
Bergman,
Yes,
Cowan,
Yes.
Maher,
Yeah. Okay, people say it wrong all the time. Benucci?
Yes.
Freiberg?
Yes.
Colbert?
Yes.
And David?
He doesn't vote.
Or he doesn't vote?
We did give notice that he was by Zoom. So Scott, do you want to vote?
Yes.
Motion
All right. There we are.
Good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think that we are now, I don't know where my regular papers are. I think it's in my paper. Is it? No, that's not it. That's the other one. Anyway, we're
All
at,
right, let me save this for a little bit.
because we don't really have to discuss the other one, right?
Correct. But maybe I'll mention that again for anyone who didn't hear before. The last item on the agenda is signing of a plat, which is right here. This plat was approved in concept at a previous meeting, and we were just waiting on its delivery. So there's no further action for the board other than for the chair to sign it. So for my report,
Yes.
it's been a crazy month. But there's some really good things coming. The first is that we have completed the startup process for our housing rehab grant. So we have money for, it'll be between 10 and 14 homes, depending on how much work they need. For low-income homeowners, 80% of median income and below, there's a bonus in the scoring criteria for people who are veterans and people who are considered, very terrible sounding distinction, but frail elderly, which has a variety of factors there. Those two things give you a bump as in addition to how substandard the house is. So there's an application that will be released very soon. We're waiting on New York State to give us a final release of funds, so we can't spend any money until we get that, but that should be literally any day. We're working with Toma Development in Cortland. Toma wrote the grant for us. So we got a grant from Tompkins County to pay them to write the much bigger grant. So we got $500,000 that will fund this program, and they're gonna run it. Each of those applicants, when they get a set of applicants, they will come to the town board to approve each project to make sure that there isn't any, local knowledge, a reason why you wouldn't do a project, like if you happen to know that a whole bunch of people who aren't listed on the application live there, or something else like that. Or there's 1,000 outstanding code violations that need to be addressed, things like that. But that program is ready to go. That's a substantial number of homes for this community. I'm really excited about it. There's a lot of compliance and a lot of work that goes into it, but glad to see it rolling. The other related thing to that is that grant that we got to write this grant that we're just now starting. It's also time to apply for that, or we got that again to apply for more money this year, and we're hiring a consultant. An RFP is out and I think due next week to hire a consultant to do a process with the town. That's going to be a bit more collaborative than the last one. We're going to have some community meetings. It's focused on the hamlets, and it has to also be focused on housing because that's what the county that funded it was funding. So it has to have a housing impact. It doesn't have to be only about housing, and it should largely address hamlet issues. And so we're going to have a few public meetings. I'll invite you all to learn about what grants are out there and how they work and how competitive we'd be. One that I'm hoping, although as I've learned more, we'll see, we'll keep learning more, but the New York Forward program is a replacement for the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, but it's a program that's for rural communities, whereas the DRI was for cities. I have been looking at past applications last year was the first year of it, and a lot of the winners were villages. But it does say they want to focus on rural communities, and I think it can fund a variety of economic development, housing, public infrastructure, all kinds of stuff. And it's kind of a chance to come up with like all the ideas. And then even if we don't get that grant, we have these things that we know we want to work towards as a community. So that process will be coming up soon. And I'm glad that we got $10,000 for this process. We only got $5,000 for the last process, and we ended up spending about $7,000 because it's such a heavy lift to do the application. So I thought we'll get a little bit more. It took longer, it had to go to the county legislature, but that means we can do a little bit of more work on it and hopefully put in, we could just apply for the same grant we got again and do, 15 more houses if there's huge demand for that. That's a possibility. The other thing that's apropos to tonight's discussions is that the town board has acknowledged that our regulations with regard to short-term rental aren't exactly where they want them to be. They don't really make sense that, you notice in the memo of the past discussions of tourist homes, one was discussed right out here, Olivia Vent's parcel across the street. It's a duplex. She wanted to rent one half of it out as an Airbnb, and she applied as a tourist home. They said, oh, this isn't a tourist home because it's a duplex. You have two separate units. It's not one unit. So it's not a tourist home. It's just allowed by right, because you can rent out one apartment in a 2-apartment house on Airbnb, and you can rent out the other one. You can just do that under the current rule. There's no regulation at all of that. There's only regulation if you live in it. So with, conversation about that, the town board had on my agenda already discussion of short-term rentals as accessory buildings. They've expanded that. They want to crack open the whole, what should we allow and what should we require with regard to short-term rentals in the whole town. So I'm working on a survey that will go out in the town news, not the one you'll be getting next month, but probably the one after that, and will be online and Facebook, and you'll be able to come drop it off here. That kind of trying to get at what are people concerned about? Do people want to make it easier to do short-term rentals? Do people want to make it harder to do short-term rentals? Do we want to have a registry? Do we want to have, you can do licensing, you can have various requirements. It's an evolving landscape. There's, as court cases get handed down, things change. So one of the recent changes is that it, not in New York, hasn't been tested in New York yet, but it's a strong precedent that municipalities probably shouldn't be requiring owner occupancy in order to do short-term rental, which is something a lot of municipalities want to do. But that's a process that's kind of just getting kicked off. So if you have thoughts and opinions or know people with thoughts and opinions about short-term rentals, they should be paying attention. And, I think my first question to the town board is, how much do you want to do, right? The first question I think to the community is, do you want change, or is the way it's working right now fine? There's definitely, I think, strong opinion from the town board that having no regulations for renting a whole unit and a very complicated process for renting what you live in doesn't really make sense. And there's also, I think, some general agreement that it would be nice if you could put up a yurt in your backyard, or what have I heard? Tree houses, Airstreams, all of those sorts of things. Should we have a process and a way for them to be allowed? If so, should everybody be allowed to do one, or should some people be allowed to do 20, but they go through a process? We're just kind of opening up that can of worms, but it's something the town board wants to prioritize talking about this year. So there will be more to come, and it would be totally appropriate for this board to weigh in with either individually or as a group with your thoughts about that moving forward. I think that's it for my report for this month. Happy to answer questions.
That's great. They're able to help people We fixed up some of the houses, the community was better.
Yeah.
That's a great job. So thanks for doing all the work.
I'm sorry for the hamlet study, and I've been meeting some of those houses.
Yes,
So you see,
it's short of your front door. Yeah. Okay. Should we adjourn? Motion to adjourn? Yeah. Done. Make it item.